think what job they're going to make of it, but this is shut next month, and so we don't have a gig for the Kalamazoo Club, I'm afraid. It's the big goes. But welcome back to Alistair Hulett.
I wrote this song living in Australia, remembering the Glasgow that I left behind in the 1960s, late 1960s. I went over to New Zealand first of all in 1967, the days of the £10 tourists, and over to Australia. But Glasgow that I left behind was massively more riven by sectarianism than it is now. I mean, I think both Rangers and Celtic football clubs have actually done quite a good job in trying to undercut all of that ridiculous sectarianism. It's got a lot to do with the Italians that have come to play for Rangers, actually. I mean, it must be awfully confusing for these loyalist Billy boys when they see people like Amoruso or Claudio Caniggia, and they genuflect before they walk on the pitch. You see these guys swaying the Union Jacks going, what the hell is this? This is a song about sectarianism and how it does nobody any good. It's called Among Proddy Dogs and Papes. As a child I was raised on salted oaks and tales of the savage past. I learned to love the drifting rain and winter's icy blast. And all day long on the Holy Isle, far out in Lamlash Bay, I walked the hills in creaking shoes where the bones of the old ones lay. And at night the head of Wallace bled on solemn floral drapes, and the flower of Scotland bloomed again among proddy dogs and papes. I was taught in school how Britannia's rule was forced on the Scots of old, bought and sold by a parcel of rogues for a handful of English gold, till the fate was sealed in Culloden Field, when the blood of the clans ran down through the twisted sea of history to the streets of Glasgow town, where at night the head of Wallace bled on solemn floral drapes, and the flower of Scotland bloomed again among proddy dogs and papes. Summer nights when the northern lights burn the sky like a sibylline, the prods and tykes they fought on the dykes that ran round the housing scheme. With sticks and stones we broke our bones for the sake of the good old cause that has kept our country bound and chained under British laws. And at night the head of Wallace bled on solemn floral drapes, and the flower of Scotland bloomed again among proddy dogs and papes. And the old men learnt how the blood was spilt on the banks of the River Boyne. 300 years of hate and fear, much like a miser's coin. And the tide rocks and the Parkhead too, on the first day of the year. See full-grown men drag it all out again while the bands on the terraces cheer. And at night the head of Wallace bled on solemn floral drapes, and the flower of Scotland bloomed again among proddy dogs and papes. Oh, at night the head of Wallace bled on solemn floral drapes, and the flower of Scotland bloomed again among proddy dogs and papes. This song was also written in Australia, but set there. I think I wrote it. I say that because it appeared by my bedside one morning after a somewhat chemically enhanced evening out. And I don't quite remember getting home, but I must have written this just before going to bed. And I had been on a sort of amphetamine-soaked ramble from my home suburb of Newtown in Sydney. Ended up in King's Cross, where they have these wonderful hotels. Back in my drinking days, I used to revere them highly. They're called early openers. 5 o'clock in the morning for all the shift workers, mainly for the people who were employed in the clubs and the bars in King's Cross, which is sort of like Sydney's Soho. They only closed down most of the clubs temporarily to kind of hose down the floors and so on. But while that's been done, the early openers and this wonderful collection of interesting people who haunt the early openers in Sydney. The criminal underworld and sex industry and drug pushers. And wrote this little song about it all. It's called Suicide Town. The seagulls are wheeling and haggling over takeaway scraps on the main drag at dawn. Some black-eyed old Susan walks up and asks me if I'd like to get off or get on. I've been up for so long, I don't think that I'll ever come down. Oh, this life's just a bruise on the surface of Suicide Town. Outside the clip joint, the tuxedo thugs are kicking some drunk in the brains. Armed to the teeth with the wild animal logic of the terminally insane. They knock off at 6, then they're in at the Anchor and Crown, where the old fellas toast a new morning in Suicide Town. Singing, where have you gone, Mrs. Brown's lovely daughter? Gone from the meat market down to the abattoir. So many had her and nobody caught her, and one day she floated away. And where are you now, Mrs. Brown's lovely daughter? I drowned in the ocean of God's holy water. All my wee lambs that were led to the slaughter, and then I just floated away. Over the asphalt and circle around like sharks in the rain. No one looks at them directly, we watch their reflection in shop window panes. Give them a gun and a badge they can wear like a frown, and they'll make sure it's business as usual in Suicide Town. Dear, what can the tree, jumping off more of the victims of chemistry. Nobody knew they were there. Down at the cab rank we all stand in line in the alfresco casualty ward. There's no conversation, there's only the small talk. Mostly it's wild and absurd. I wish I was home, I can't sleep, but I'd love to lie down and watch the amphetamine replay of Suicide Town. And the seagulls are wheeling and haggling over takeaway straps on the main Dragon Guard. Thank you. There's some events in one's life that so kind of impact on your memory or on your consciousness that you remember for years and years later what you were doing at the time when you heard that this event had taken place. And most of us remember, of a certain age, most of us remember what we were doing when Elvis Presley died, when John Kennedy was shot, when John Lennon was shot. Over in Australia, a lot of people remember what they were doing when a democratically elected government was sacked by an unelected representative of the British Queen in 1975. That government was led by a fellow called Gough Whitlam, and ironically, he was actually on the right of the Labour Party, but the drift has been such that now he's seen as a kind of icon of the left. But, this is a song about what I was doing when the word came through that John Kerr, the Governor General of Australia, had taken it upon himself to sack the Labour government because the Tories in the upper house had blocked supply of the budget. And the response of the working class in Australia was cataclysmic. All over Australia, people walked out of their workplaces and made their way into the centre of their cities. And the army was put onto red alert. They feared there was going to be rioting in the streets. And then on the steps, so I was broadcast on the television. I was watching. I remember what we did. I was employed at the time in a factory that made oxide powder that you mix into cement to make it go different colours. My job was to clean out the machine that used to mix up the different colours. And we walked out and went up to a TV store where there was a TV in the shop, and we watched the events unfolding. And Gough Whitlam got up on the steps of the Houses of Parliament and told people to maintain their rage. And the leader of the trade union movement at the time was a fellow called Bob Hawke, who went on to become the Prime Minister. And he told the workers all over the country to keep cool and to go back to work, not to go on strike, that the election would come around. That's what Gough meant by maintain your rage. Wait until election day and sort it all out then. If you've ever come across a book by John Pilger called The Secret Country, you'll realise the extent of the destabilisation of that government that was going on. Actually, this song is quoted if you happen to have the hardcover version of John Pilger's book, A Secret Country, the first edition. He quotes my song in it in full. It's called The Ballad of 1975. But I had an overzealous agent at the time who decided to hit John Pilger for royalties. So the next edition came out and I'm not in it. Anyway, the song's called The Ballad of 1975. Oh, there's a reference to the double dissolution. This is when the two houses were both dissolved. The double dissolution, the upper house and the lower house. We have the same system in Australia as here except the upper house is also elected, and the sky didn't fall in. I remember the day I was no more than a boy, working in an oxide plant at the back of North Fitzroy. Bert Gilchrist told the gaffer, cause Bert Gilchrist had the clout. He said they've given Gough the bullet and the lads are walking out, and we walked right off that job while the gaffer held the door and watched it on the telly in a TV rental store. It was one hell of a situation, the kind you just can't gauge. There was Gough on the steps of Parliament House saying, now maintain the rage. In the year of the double dissolution, drinking in the streets gave way to doubt. Australia voted in a revolution, then stood back and let the fat cats push it out. There was violence in the air as I walked back home that night. Everyone you'd meet was getting ready for the fight, saying if they're out for trouble, then trouble's what they'll get. We started out a colony, did they think we're a colony yet? In the year of the double dissolution, drinking in the streets gave way to doubt. Australia voted in a revolution, then stood back and let the fat cats push it out. But as the weeks went by, the anger turned to mild relief. Locks were freed like magic, and I watched in disbelief to see a scam so blatant, so jacked up and full of holes. And the people in the thousands endorsed it at the polls. In the year of the double dissolution, drinking in the streets gave way to doubt. Australia voted in a revolution, then stood back and let the fat cats push it out. Some said they had it coming, some were closer to the mark, who spoke about conspiracy, sinister and dark. But history records it, and the story will be read, how we let them take democracy and stand it on its head. In the year of the double dissolution, drinking in the streets gave way to doubt. Australia voted in a revolution, then stood back and let the fat cats push it out. Australia voted in a revolution, then stood back and let the fat cats push it out. I've always been kind of fascinated by historical events which sort of sneak past the historians, events that should be taught to every child in every school the length and breadth of this country, and they barely rate a mention. One of those is the Glasgow rent strike of 1915. When the war broke out, Glasgow was a centre of wartime production, and workers were drawn into the city to work in the munitions factories and in the shipyards, and this massive increase in the population resulted in a housing shortage, and unscrupulous landlords known as profiteers and racketeers began driving up the cost of rent and evicting anybody who couldn't pay. And the response from the working class was to refuse to pay their rent. So it was a rent strike. It broke out in a ship building area in Glasgow called Govan. It was led by a woman called Mary Barber. She was a housewife from Govan. She decided that she was just going to withhold her rent, and so she made a poster that said, "I'm not paying increased rent," and stuck it up in her window. Actually, there was a series on quite recently on the TV, it might still be going on, which was produced by the BBC, which was a little bit about that rent strike. But it spread right across the city of Glasgow, and over 250,000 families were on rent strike. Eventually the government cracked down and arrested the leaders, including Mary Barber, and the response was that the men came out of the factories and marched on the sheriff's court and threatened to tear it down unless all those inside were instantly released and the charges were dropped. And a phone call was put through to Lloyd George, who at that time was the Minister of Munitions, and it was the Lord Provost of Glasgow, like the mayor. He said, "Glasgow's on the verge of revolt over this rent issue, what am I to do?" And he said, "Tell them a Rent Restriction Act will be put in place immediately." And the Rent Restriction Act of 1915, which effectively forbade landlords from profiteering, was fought for and won by the women of Glasgow, mainly the women, because the men of course were at work when the blockades that were necessary to keep the strike going were in place. It was fought for and won by the women of Glasgow, led by Mary Barber, and this is a wee song I wrote about her. It's called Mrs. Barber's Army. In the tenements of Glasgow in the year 1915, it was one long bloody struggle to keep ourselves alive. We were counting out the coppers to buy our scraps of food, when the landlords bit the rent off just because they could. The factories were humming, there was overtime galore, but wages they were driven down to subsidise the war. Out came Mrs. Barber from her wee bit single end. She said, "I'll organise the lasses if I cannae rouse the men, 'cause I'm fae Govan and you're fae Partick. The sheriff's fae Bridgeway and on's fae Kinnampar. There's some that's broads, there's some that's Catholic, but we're Mrs. Barber's Army and we're here to do the work." Mrs. Barber made a poster saying we'll no pay higher rent, then chapped on every door of every Govan tenement. She said, "Put this in the wind here when you hear me bang the drum, or run out and chase the factor for away to kingdom come." When the poor wee soul come round, he was battered black and blue by a regiment in pennies that knew just what to do. Mrs. Barber organised the gathering of the clans, and they burst out with the steamy, armed with pots and frying pans, saying, "I'm fae Govan and you're fae Partick. The sheriff's fae Bridgeway and on's fae Kinnampar. There's some that's broads, there's some that's Catholic, but we're Mrs. Barber's Army and we're here to do the work." Mrs. Barber's Army spread through Glasgow like a plague. The maesters got the message and the message was nae vague. While our men folk fight the Kaiser, we'll stay home and fight the war against the greedy bastards who keep driving down the poor. If you want to stop conscription, stand and fight the profiteers. Bring the hail big bloody sandpit crashing down around their ears. We'll no starve, said Mrs. Barber, while the men we cover in are marching off to hear their heart's blood wash like water down a drain. Says I'm for govern and you're for party. The shit is for bridge aware and Don's for Kinnan Park. There's some that's broads, there's some that's Catholic, but we're Mrs. Barber's army and we're here to do the work. Well, it didn't take the government that long to realise if you crack down on the leaders, then the rest will compromise. They arrested Mrs. Barber and they clapped her in the jail, but they made an awfully big mistake. They let her out on bail. She caught the men into the factories on the Clyde and on the cart. They marched up to the courthouse saying we'll tear the place apart. Mrs. Barber's army brought the maesters to their knees with a regiment and pennies backed by van and dungarees, saying I'm for govern and you're for party. The shit is for bridge aware and Don's for Kinnan Park. There's some that's broads, there's some that's Catholic, but we're Mrs. Barber's army and we're here to do the work. I want Mrs. Barber's army and we're here to do the work. Thank you. Don't know where I learned this. I feel like I've always known it. The sun gonna shine in my back door someday. I'm going down to that river, take along my rocking chair, and if the blues don't leave me, gonna rock on away from there. Traveling miles, I'm blue. I won't be blue always, for the sun gonna shine in my back door someday. See right up, see what you done. Oh, you made me love you, now your man done come. I'm gonna lay my head on a lonesome railroad line. Let the old 19 pacify my mind. gonna shine in my back door. The sun gonna shine in my back door. The sun gonna shine in my back door someday. Thank you. Yeah, I spent years living in an area in Sydney called Newtown. When I first began to live there, it used to be dead cheap. The upwardly mobile began moving in. I mean, I've got nothing against anybody's chosen lifestyle. It just really gets up my nose when some bloody yuppie's thrown up in my jacuzzi. I wonder where I put my capo there. I wrote this song while I was living in Newtown. I was playing with a band called Roaring Jack at the time. We played punk folk. I've got the pictures to prove it. This became our signature tune. This is the non-punk arrangement of it. Called Yuppie Town. People who live round here, they don't have that much. With things others wouldn't even touch. People who live round here, they work in the factories, and they don't have to choose, they're ruled by necessity, and they better watch out. There's a new breed taking over, they're driving us out. They've been giving us the old ones over. They want to tear the place down and turn it into yuppie town. They want to tear the place down and turn it into yuppie town. People who live around here remember how it used to be. Your neighbour on the street was stopping for a cup of tea. People who live round here, they like to have a beer and all. But since the old pub changed hands, you can't get in overalls, and they better watch out. There's a new breed taking over, they're driving us out. They've been giving us the old ones over. They want to tear the place down and turn it into yuppie town. They want to tear the place down and turn it into yuppie town. such a state. People who live round here pull down the price of real estate, and they better watch out. There's a new breed taking over, they're driving us out. They've been giving us the old once over. They want to tear the place down and turn it into yuppie town. They want to tear the place down and turn it into yuppie town. They want to tear the place down and turn it into yuppie town. Right at the very start, I was singing and speaking about a fella called John McLean. When McLean was released in 1918, after serving only 7 months of a 5-year sentence, 200,000 people turned up at Buchanan Street railway station to welcome him home. December the 9th, 1918, he stepped off the train from Aberdeen, where he had been imprisoned at Peterhead jail, and eyewitnesses say that the windows for miles around shook as a result of the cheering as he stepped onto the platform. And there's a fella called Willie Gallagher, who was the first elected Communist Party MP in Scotland, most probably in Britain. He was there at the time of Red Clydeside with McLean, and he's written a book called Revolt on the Clyde, and in that book he describes that night when McLean returned to Glasgow. Describes how there was a horse-drawn carriage there to take him and his wife and his children and Willie Gallagher and the socialist suffragette Mrs. Montefiore on a red flag procession through the city of Glasgow. It got as far as Carlton Place, and the cart was resting on its axles because 200,000 people had climbed on to shake John's hand. And he was asked to make a speech, but during his time in jail he had been force-fed. He went on hunger strike and he was force-fed, and so they had pushed a tube up his nose and into his throat to feed him, and this had been going on for about 5 months, twice a day. So his voice box was so damaged he couldn't really speak very well. So his speech was pretty short. This is December 1918, the war has just concluded. McLean rose to his feet and said, "Three cheers for the German working class. We've just overthrown the Kaiser." And Mrs. Montefiore said that her eardrums nearly split apart. The tumultuous cheer in response to that. This is a song that I wrote for the Red Clydeside album, which, although Swart's not here, he's on every track of this CD, and a couple of others I've been playing some songs from. So he sends his regards and advises you to take a little bit of him home in the form of a CD. This is a song called When Johnny Came to Glasgow. It was the only game in town. Folk knew they had to be there when John came into Glasgow all the way to Aberdeen. Buchanan Street was heaving, hours before the train was due there. 100,000 gathered up to welcome John McLean. A rod and a sign on my throat was a raw when Johnny came home to Glasgow. And I danced for the tongue to the broomy law. Well, I see it was not Francesca. A pit up on it and Gladstone's Heath. I missed the last tram home to Parky, licked by the law and in trouble with them all when Johnny came home to Glasgow. When he stepped onto the kilpon, it was like a crack of thunder. Like a cheer it made the windies rattle all around George Square. The clays were hanging off him, strang and wet, and it's no wonder when the Lion o' Red Clydeside had pulled down the Queen Street stair. A roared and I sang till my throat was raw when Johnny came home to Glasgow. And I danced with the Tronty, the Brimilla, well I see the Scott Francesca. A pip up on it on Gladstone's Heath, I missed the last tram home to party. Picked by the law, I'm in trouble with my ma when Johnny came home to Glasgow. Up there on yon carriage, pulled a line by Brosy Callants, in his hands a scarlet banner and defiance in his ear. Had you wished and hear the message, for it rings out like a ballad. Power to the workers here, and likewise out in Germany. I roared and I sang till my throat was raw when Johnny came home to Glasgow. And I danced with the Tronty, the Brimilla, well I see it was Scott Francesca. A pip up on it on Gladstone's Heath, I missed the last tram home to party. Picked by the law and in trouble with my ma when Johnny came home to Glasgow. Glasgow in the glory days, those thousands lived in squalor. From the west into the south side, revolution filled the air. Manny Shinwell, Davy Kirkwood, John McLean and Willie Gallagher said to the bosses 40 hours and ne'er a minute there. Though I roared and I sang till my throat was raw when Johnny came home to Glasgow. And I danced with the Tronty, the Brimilla, well I see the Scott Francesca. Who ran and me and thousands more who marched together into George Square, doing with the law and the devil tack them all. New Johnny's come home to Glasgow. Thanks ever so much. I'm going to finish off with this next song. It's been lovely to be in your club. Thank you ever so much, and thoroughly enjoyed myself. Be back up to Glasgow tomorrow. This is a song I wrote in Australia in 1988, which was Australia's bicentenary, a celebration of 200 years of white occupation of Aboriginal lands, as far as the native inhabitants were concerned. And along with a great many other musicians and artists and so on, I've been involved throughout 1987 in a series of fundraising concerts to try to get the money together to bring Aboriginal elders from the central desert to Sydney, because they wanted to be present at the reenactment of Captain Cook's landing in Australia. They wanted to be there to blow a raspberry at the tall ships, and we felt that was something that we'd like to help to make happen ourselves. So it struck me as kind of amusing when I heard that my band that I was playing with at the time had been invited to participate in the bicentenary celebration, to provide some of the music, and my initial response was, of course, to say no thank you, until we discovered that you had to sign a contract that would say you wouldn't say or sing or do anything to upset the dignitaries assembled on that happy occasion. So this is the song I wrote to upset the dignitaries. It's called The Swaggies Have All Waltzed Matilda Away. Thanks a lot for listening. Country in fetters and chains, outlaws and rebels with numbers for names, and on the triangle were beaten and maimed, blood stained the soil of Australia. turkeys and duchesses, flash lads and whores. You worked their plantations and polished their floors, lived in their shadow and died in their wars. Blood stained the soil of Australia. Does it quicken your heartbeat to see tar and concrete cover the tracks on the old bullet train? Have you grown so heartless to christen it progress when the swaggies have all waltzed Matilda away? From your own native home, hardship and poverty caused you to roam over the bracken and over the foam. Blood stained the soil of Australia. Then in the fever for fortune and fame, you caused the poor blacks to suffer the same, imprisoned on missions or hunted for game. Blood stained the soil of Australia. Does it quicken your heartbeat to see tar and concrete cover the tracks on the old bullet train? Have you grown so heartless to christen it progress when the swaggies have all waltzed Matilda away? It's 200 years since she came to this land, betrayed by the girl with a black velvet band, and still to this day you don't understand. Blood stained the soil of Australia, Coorey and white, old Australian and new, brothers and sisters of every hue. The future is ours, take the wealth from the few and raise the red flag in Australia. Let it quicken your heartbeat, they're all at your own feet. Travel it lightly and travel it well, and don't speak of success or christen it progress till the swaggies can all waltz Matilda as well. And don't speak of success or christen it progress till the swaggies can all waltz Matilda as well.
He's going to do one more for the road. Take it back to Glasgow, folks. But, big hand for Alistair, for taking this show on, folks.
Thanks very much. Can I ask you to continue your applause and thank on the sound, can we thank Peter, who's done a marvellous job for us. And for the three lads as well, who played us such wonderful music right at the start of the night. Paul and Gary and the three boys. What are we going to do? Let's see. This is a song about events that took place in Scotland. Again, left out of the history books. The Highland clearances, I believe they're teaching it now in the schools in Scotland, but for years it was kept quiet. But if it was to happen today, it would be called ethnic cleansing. It started in 1792, there was a government that project got underway to remove the human population, the non-English speaking semi-tribal inhabitants of what they were then calling North Britain, the Scottish Highlands, to move them and turn the whole of the Scottish Highlands into a gigantic sheep farm to feed the textile industry in the central belt of Scotland and down in England. At the time it was known as the Highland Clearances, and at that time the road from the Highlands down to Glasgow was known as the Destitution Road, and literally thousands lost their lives on that road of starvation and exposure to the elements. Chorus goes, there's no use getting frantic, it's time to hump your load across the wild Atlantic, down the Destitution Road. Oh, lost it. In the year of the sheep and the barren time, they cutter young men in the prime. The old Scots way was a hanging crime. The Gales of Caledonia, there's a den for the fox, a hedge for the hare, a nest and a tree for the birds of the air. But in North Scotland there's no place there, the Gales of Caledonia, and there's no use getting frantic, it's time to hump your load across the wild Atlantic on the Destitution Road. The bailiff came with a written dog, and the gallant lads of the 43, they drove you out in the sleet and snow, the Gales of Caledonia. When your house was burned and your crops as well, you stood and wept in the blackened shell, and the winter moor was a living hell, the Gales of Caledonia. And there's no use getting frantic, it's time to hump your load across the wild Atlantic on the Destitution Road. Dragged you down as you made your way to Glasgow, where you'd heard of a ship that was sailing soon for the shores of Nova Scotia. And you sold your gear, you paid your fare, with your head held high though your heart was sore, and you bid farewell forevermore to the glens of Caledonia. And there's no use getting frantic, it's time to hump your load across the wild Atlantic on the Destitution Road. The land was cleared and the deal was made. No English lord in a tartan blade, he struts and stares as the memories fade, the Gales of Caledonia. And he hunts the deer in the lonely glen that once was home to 1,000 men, and the wind on the moor sings a sad refrain, the Gales of Caledonia. Oh, there's no use getting frantic, it's time to hump your load across the wild Atlantic on the Destitution Road. Oh, there's no use getting frantic, it's time to hump your load across the wild